The Canby Report was produced and recorded on the traditional territories of the Coquitlam, Mississaugas of the Credit, Anishinaabeg, Chippewa, Haudenosaunee, and Wendat peoples.
It's February 6, 2025, and there are 58 days until the April 5th by-elections, and 618 days until the Vancouver municipal elections. This is the Canby Report. I'm Matthew Naylor.
And I'm Ian Bushfield. Happy February.
Happy February, Ian. It's so nice to be back with you, and back with you, listeners.
Much has happened in the world in just a couple weeks.
Including a very inconsiderate thing that happened during our last recording session that we weren't able to bring you, but we will be bringing you today. Ken Sim, I hesitate to ascribe malice to him, especially since there's no godly way that he could know our recording schedule, irregular as it has been. But I'm going to blame him anyway, because the mayor is a petulant baby. Interest of bringing you further coverage on the mayor's tantrums, please support our Patreon at patreon.com/CanbyReport.
Patreon.com/CanbyReport. We're looking forward to doing lots more coverage of the upcoming by-election and just continuing to make this show for y'all.
Yes, your source for citizen journalism in Vancouver and its environs, patreon.com/CanbyReport. By-election.
We have candidates. Most of the candidates. As of 30 minutes from now, when we're recording, but when you're listening to this, these people will all be announced. Thank you to media relations people who shared some news under embargo with us. First, the announcement came from one city that they had selected Lucy Maloney as their candidate.
Yes, Lucy Maloney, who was born in Melbourne, Australia, and has a law degree and an MBA. It says she's pursued a career in environmental law and in business. But she lives in the West End and has children in a West End school.
She's most prominent for her work with Vision Zero Vancouver. That's the campaign to make roads safer, to get there to be no traffic fatalities for pedestrians, to make roads safer for pedestrians, for cyclists, and ultimately for cars too, by just making better infrastructure. She's also been involved in the District Parent Advisory Committee for Vancouver, involved in schools, and wants to speak to all the issues one city has talked about. When her announcement came out, the urbanists were very excited. Everyone who's met her says she's a lovely, great human being who will do good work. Like, none of these people we're going to talk about have a big public profile prior to this in a traditional political sense. But that's because council is often your first step to a longer political career. So
one thing that she has highlighted is continuing to implement Christine Boyle's social housing motion that was passed in 2022, which has broadly not been implemented yet. We'll go into some of ABC's further shenanigans on housing later in the show. This is important to be focusing on, so I'm heartened to see that it is part of the debate.
The next candidate to be announced, and I think Lucy was acclaimed by one city, as far as I know, and Sean Orr was acclaimed as the candidate for Cope. Orr is possibly the second most prominent of the candidates we're going to talk about, as he ran in 2022 with Vote Socialist. We mentioned last time that the Socialists weren't going to run this time, and now it seems like they've just folded up the tent and joined Cope, as makes relative sense.
While the teams are not working together, Vote Socialist seems to have someone aligned with their priorities running under the Cope banner. In the previous election, the Vote Socialist candidate earned 13,744 votes, a substantial number. If we compare this to the last time there was a by-election for a council seat, he would win if he can get all those people to turn out. Hector Bremner in the 2017 by-elections won 13,372 votes, a solid 3,000 and change above second place Jean Swanson.
Yeah, or has a pretty good shot here, right? He's got Cope's machine behind him, which is not negligible. It's not as strong in my view as One City's based on the fundraising data we've seen. We haven't seen the 2024 numbers yet. For 2023, Cope and One City were both raising more than the Greens. Greens got name recognition. For a by-election, getting people out matters so much, or having his own experience door knocking plus the support of what's around for Cope will help. And so I expect a lot of the lefty momentum to focus on those two. But notably, the progressives, the opposition, are running 3, with the Greens having just announced 30 minutes from now that Annette Riley will be their candidate. She's beating Pamela Dudas in their contested nomination race.
Annette is, according to her biography, a award-winning filmmaker, health advocate, and mom. Also a renter. She has a fine arts degree from the University of Victoria and has worked in the film industry, including playing the title character's mom in the popular Netflix series The Chilling Adventures of Sabrina.
Vancouver's got a prominent film industry, so good for her for getting involved. She's on Blue Sky as of a couple weeks ago and has been posting political stuff. A lot of it's aligned with the Greens, targeting climate activism, but also retweeting Charlie Angus and pro-Canada stuff. I'll be really interested to see how her campaign develops. She beat Pamela Dudas, president of the Britannia Community Services Centre Society, and has been involved in that and a number of other committees and experience in the community. I'm surprised Dudas couldn't organize a stronger campaign, and the fact that she couldn't win the Green nomination's a good sign. She probably couldn't have won a council seat.
Meanwhile, Team for a Livable Vancouver, she's back from outer space, raising hell to make sure you don't build shit in her space. Colleen Hardwick is carrying the banner for Team for a Livable Vancouver again of her unsuccessful run for the mayoralty last time, and is joined in the team nomination by Theodore Abbott, a born and raised East Vancouverite, 4th generation Vancouverite, who is also a community organizer and urban researcher.
Yeah, it's kind of a generational divide on the team slate. You have Hardwick, I don't actually know what generation she is, probably X, maybe a little bit older. Abbott might be Gen Z, and if he won, he could be the first Gen Z councillor on City Council, which, given how the first millennial councillor went...
Was that Hector?
No, it was MDG. Melissa DeGenova, famously the first millennial councillor.
Terrible.
Theodore is the host of the On-Site report that explores urban issues, so I guess he's a competitor to ours, but I hadn't heard of it until now.
Well, we still remain in stiff competition with the Delta Police, Vancouver's most popular political podcast.
He describes his podcast as about the degeneration of the city of Vancouver.
Oof.
Team Mold. His latest episode is Pause the Plan, where they're opposed to the Broadway plan.
Well, that's really rough, and think that's gross, and we should not elect him.
ABC has not announced their candidates yet. There's still a week or two until the nomination deadlines from the city, even before the nomination package is open for a few more days. So I expect we will have an announcement from ABC that this is our team, kind of like they did in the election and like NPA has done for the last few elections. It's just like, here's a bunch of people we found, they're our candidates. And you go, okay.
Well, we mentioned this a little bit earlier, but the Vancouver Mayor Ken Sim has rejected the idea of building more supportive housing projects and has promised a crackdown on gangs. This includes freezing the development of new supportive housing projects.
Citywide.
True, it's citywide indeed. Basically, we're saying to people, go fuck yourself, and maybe Coquitlam should build you a house.
Not wrong on the latter part. We only have one supportive project in all of the Tri-Cities. Ken Sim's announcement comes at the Save Our Streets rally that they held. This is the organization founded by businesses like London Drugs and well supported by the Vancouver Police and a few other agencies. not so much grassroots in my view as an effort to get more money for the police and go after poor people. It seems like that's most of their announcements. And this one is quite along that line.
The mayor in particular suggested that there was a poverty industrial complex in the downtown east side, saying that this is a area that is a hub for gangs and drug activity. And it is a hub for drug activity, but that's because a policy of neglect by the city has forced a lot of people into an area where they can get support.
It's something that occurs almost organically, right?
Yeah.
It's easier to provide supports when everyone's in the same place, and the more supports that are there, the more people will migrate there because that's where the supports are. And it's not an attempt to warehouse, but it's like build a community where people have networks of people in similar socioeconomic situations, where there are resources and supports. That does put a bigger burden on the city of Vancouver, but the city of Vancouver is also the core of our region. If you look at almost any city around the world, you either have one of two ways of dealing with the poverty that is often in or around cities. It either navigates to the core or it's in slums.
Literally marginalizing people. And this is something that does need a region-wide strategy associated with it. Coquitlam, the Tri-Cities are not doing their part. There needs to be more development of supportive housing across the region. Ken Sim isn't wrong about that one particular thing. However, there are fora for discussing those kinds of things, including Metro Vancouver. Unfortunately, that seems to have been foreclosed, as we will get to in a moment. That being said, there are, in the downtown east side, rumblings about the tipping point, and not the Malcolm Gladwell book.
But before, I do want to highlight that this motion he's going to bring forward at the end of this month around no more supportive houses in the city of Vancouver, at least net new ones, so that will replace existing ones, didn't seem to go over well within his own caucus. Rebecca Bly, supported by Lisa Dominato, has already brought forward a motion to at least say, hey, maybe we should ask the housing minister of BC and BC Housing to come and talk to the city and give us some more background on what the situation is. Ravi Kalon, for his part, was asked about this by the media, and he said, not building people houses is going to lead to more crime. We know this. It's going to make things worse. Every other city should be doing more, but if Vancouver stops, it's not going to help anyone. You can't just bully your way through this.
Ken Sim isn't doing this because he's basing this on evidence. He's basing this on vibes and the whims of the London Drugs CEO.
Who sucks.
Who does suck, yes. He has, as I mentioned brief, stood by Ken Sim at the recent press conference, decrying the state of affairs in the downtown east side, the poverty industrial complex, which truly a larger contradiction in terms does not exist. London Drugs is basically threatening the city with leaving the Woodwards building downtown.
This is the chief operating officer, Clinton Malman. London Drugs has a history of issuing big political threats. A number of years ago, they threatened to leave Delta if the roads into Metro weren't improved, like the Massey Tunnel. Maybe they will. The losses and the profits of the Woodward building aren't sufficient to justify keeping it open, but we're not seeing hard data that shoplifting is out of control in that location. They're not going to present their books, so we're taking their word. They are also citing threats to employees from patrons and people wandering in off the streets, leaning hard on the vibes notion here.
Yeah, their lease ends in October, and they've been the marquee tenant for this location. If the business isn't working out, they should leave. That's the responsible thing to do for their shareholders. But doing political threats, I think unbecoming, which is really a shame because I love London Drugs. I truly miss London Drugs. The fact that it doesn't operate out in Toronto is so sad, and it's the store that I miss most about going out east. I did also work at London Drugs in full disclosure more than 2 decades ago.
it's disappointing and frustrating if a major retailer closes in what was supposed to be the landmark transformation building of the area. But I also think we need politicians who don't just bow to a corporation making demands like this. Instead, we see Ken Sim just standing aside the guy.
Part of the problem is that the landmark redevelopment came, at a time when basically the region gets hit full on by the fentanyl crisis. Like, things weren't as bad when the Woodward building was developed, and things have only gotten worse. Like, we're appointing this fentanyl czar, which, cool. I hope, in trying to make lemonade out of lemons, we can take this opportunity to look at any options we have to combat this fentanyl crisis. Going over the border is not my primary concern, nor should it be, given that less than 1% of the fentanyl going into the U.S. is coming from Canada. It cannot be denied that we have a fentanyl problem in Canada, and we need to do something about it, and we just don't know what to do.
The one promising thing I've seen is the latest numbers from BC's chief coroner are that toxic drug overdose deaths are down 13% last year, and the lowest in 3 or 4 years, which is a promising trend. Now, the coroner seemed to attribute that to a similar trend other jurisdictions are witnessing, so it might just be the, black market drug mixers have changed their recipes to be less dangerous for a while. They found a cheaper way to do things that also doesn't kill people, which is good for them, I guess.
Great. I mean, from a pure economics point of view. From a pure
human casualty point of view.
Yeah, it truly is generally bad business to kill your clients. That's not a good idea. But, we joke about this. It's an ongoing horror show that we don't truly know why this 13% decrease happened. We don't have very good data. It's incredibly hard to collect good data, particularly amongst drug users who, many people just die without being recorded in the appropriate way or tracked. We don't know risk. If someone has a magic, if Trump had a magic solution and was just like, you should do this, and it will definitely work, we should do that. But he doesn't, and so we can't. What a pickle.
But back to Vancouver and the problems we can solve. You mentioned we need a regional solution to many of these problems. But one way to not get a regional solution is to not be a part of it. As Ken Sim has said, he's boycotting Metro Vancouver, decrying the system as broken and ineffective at governing the region.
For a statement to Global News recently, he stated, "Moving forward, I will not be attending Metro meetings and supporting a system that lacks accountability. Metro Vancouver's costs to taxpayers and Vancouverites are out of control. We need real, meaningful change more than ever."
His comments come as a few councillors across the region, people like Cash Heed, Daniel Fontaine in New West, Heeds in Richmond, have been criticizing Metro and expanding the region where they can critique Metro. Some of it seems rather petty. It's like, they spent too much on per diems, which can be an issue, but it's orange juice stuff as opposed to the North Shore wastewater treatment plant is a boondoggle and very worthy of criticism.
I think politicians in general should be paid more. We don't pay our politicians enough. It encourages people to be venal, purchasable commodities at the whims of big businesses and not focused on good governance. Ken Sim being the prime example of that, given that he has been dropped into our laps at the behest of the police union and Chip Wilson. Metro Vancouver has problems. I don't know exactly what the solution to that is going to be, or whether we should be electing Metro Vancouver councillors directly. There is one elected directly from electoral area A, which I ran for and lost many years ago. But it's not like Ken Sim was a super engaged member of Metro Vancouver's council, or that he was really working hard to change the problems, given that he only attended about a quarter of the meetings last year.
Yeah, that was Pete Fry's immediate criticism of this announcement. How can you call it broken when you don't even show up? The other thing that really undermines Ken Sim's message here is that he's made no dictate 2 ABC counselors. He's just said, I'm not attending anymore. I don't care if my party does. Like, are they still a party, Matthew?
I don't think so. Truly, in name only, and even so just.
They don't seem to like each other.
No, they don't. Well, that is great for you and I as podcasters. Maybe not great for the city that they ostensibly govern. Metro Vancouver does a lot of important stuff, like sewerage and water being chief amongst them, and then transit, which is governed through the Council of Mayors, but that's still a Metro Vancouver-y body. The governance structures there are more complex than I have let on, but we don't have time for that right now. Moving along. Governance review could be something that they want to study, but you have to be engaged in the process. You have to engage yourself and make an honest effort before you can say, this is broken, I give up.
Yeah.
But it is taking laziness and claiming it is a act of political principle. And that's bullshit.
There are times when you quit a thing in principle. This does not seem like that. Yeah.
Sometimes you quit a thing on principle, and sometimes you are fired. Just as has happened in Victoria, as the Victoria School Board has been dismissed by Education Minister Lisa Baer over police in schools.
To the minister, it's because the board was dysfunctional, ungovernable, and refused to pass a safety plan that was acceptable to the province. It seems to those on the board and their supporters, like the Parent Advisory Council, that safety plan had to include police in schools or it was never going to be accepted by the province. The Human Rights Commissioner has said we need an investigation into this firing. Is there any evidence that the police in schools make it safer? Victoria removed them a couple years ago. If you go back far enough, the Victoria Police removed themselves from the schools in protest of money. They got back in, and then the school board said, no, we don't want you following the Black Lives Matter protests. And they've stood firm on that, and were re-elected in 2022, very clearly maintaining this line in the sand. Things came to a head over the past few months as the province issued a special advisor, required them to deliver safety plans. The local police chiefs had been speaking out and saying, we can't work with this board anymore. The thing that probably really sank the school board, though, was when the local First Nation chiefs said, we've lost faith in this school board. They're not consulting fairly with us or in good faith or even at all. And we think there is a value to having police in schools because some of those police are Indigenous and are making good relations. And the school board ate it.
Yes. Obviously, there's going to be a by-election. No, there is just going to be an administrator running things for the next 18 months.
I had to look back when the Vancouver School Board was fired in 2016 over its refusal to pass a budget and allegations of toxic workplace. Funny how allegations of toxic workplace seem to arise every time a process is doomed to fail for a school board. It's almost like that's not a healthy way to operate any body.
Yeah, from what I understand, there was a substantial amount of bullying taking place in Vancouver.
Things definitely increase when the pressure comes down.
Yeah.
In either case, they did do a by-election in 2017 for Vancouver that coincided with the city's by-election that brought in Hector Bremner. We didn't cover that school board by-election very closely because we've never really covered school boards that closely because they are opaque and hard to look at, like Vancouver still is.
Yes. The Vancouver School Board has closed some school board-controlled fields, particularly to dogs, but basically fences are up. Locks have been placed on the fences and gates at several schools. They are no longer open to the public. These are the fields at Templeton, Lord Nelson, and Charles Tupper on the east side, and Lord Byng, Lord Roberts, Lord Tennyson, and Bayview. Maybe we should think about renaming some of our schools, dear Lord, on the west side.
It's a frustrating situation for local residents because, especially around Templeton, they've started to organize and point out many of us don't have yards. We use the school board facilities, these fields, as communal gathering spaces. They were valuable to us. We'd walk our dogs, meet, hang out, have picnics after hours or on the weekends, but now it's locked. The school board's argument, according to staff, is These non-school users were disruptive and damaging property. Dogs were digging holes and otherwise damaging it. To protect it for student use, they had to close it. This seems like a good policy debate to have at a school board level, which is what they tried to bring. Only the school board said, no, this is a operational issue that you have to just argue with staff at, and you cannot present to school board about this issue, Matthew.
That is surprising, and I think that, well, school board has good reasons for a lot of the things that it does. Maybe they just don't want to talk to people on this one, and that's not the reason you should run for things. If you don't want to hear from people, you're kind of in control, but you're also the chief person to get yelled at. That's how accountability works, folks.
One city trustee, Jennifer Reddy, has been complaining about a lack of transparency and openness at the school board. This issue predates the current board and has been getting worse over the years as it gets insular and shuts down opportunities for public engagement. Across the province, there are school boards where public engagement is off the rails and anti-trans groups are trying to hijack boards and go chaotic. I haven't heard of those attempts in Vancouver, and they've definitely gone way too far the other direction into just like no one can really know. Like, people barely know what school boards do. We're having a school board by-election in my district because one of the trustees was elected to provincial government.
Ooh, lucky you.
2 advanced polling locations on 2 separate days, and then there's 8 polling locations on election day across the entire city of Coquitlam. It's going to be record low turnout, like 5% if we're lucky. School boards are important, but it's frustrating when they lack engagement with the community, and this is not a good look for the Vancouver School Board.
And it should be noted that of the Vancouver School Board, ABC Vancouver controls 5 seats, one city has 1, Cope has 1, and the Greens have 2. So if you're going to lay this at anyone's feet, it is ABC Vancouver's.
One of those ABC quit.
Fair enough.
Well, from blocking dogs in parks to blocking cars in streets, a new proposal is coming forward to City Council to look at the Granville Entertainment. The continual move to improve Granville Street has its next consultation paper looking for public feedback. The long-term proposal is over the next 20 years to make it a fully pedestrian corridor from the bridge to waterfront with some key zones and a big shift. It looks honestly really cool. I like it. Who doesn't like it is Movement, the transit advocacy group, who says kicking bus off here is a step too far, especially if we're not upgrading Seymour and Howe sufficiently to manage the traffic.
I mean, sure, I guess the argument is that they are upgrading Seymour to handle the traffic. I think that the pedestrianization of at least one street would be really nice for Vancouver. This is going to begin with the area from, I believe, Georgia down to Drake, and the plan in the long term is to extend that all the way up to waterfront through the financial district. That sounds very cool. I like it a lot. They want to have it be focused more on a both day and night complete experience rather than just to be a nightlife spot. Vancouver is one of the few cities that has this like weird obsession with cramming all its clubs into one horrible place. Granville has been being revitalized for the entire time that I lived in Vancouver. Nothing has needed to be revitalized so many times as the Granville Strip, and 'twas ever thus. We move forward into the past.
I don't go down there as much as I used to, but every time I do now, a prominent venue has changed. I think it was Vogue that became Venue and is now something else. The names change pretty quickly. At least Commodore Ballroom is still there.
Yes, I'm just pleased that the brief incarnation of Republic as the Queen's Republic, which Donnelly Group, dear Lord, what were you doing, did not stick around. Queens do not, by definition, have republics.
From drinking downtown to drinking on the beach, the park board has accomplished something in permitting alcohol on 7 beaches on a permanent basis in summers.
It is interesting that you say drinking downtown to drinking on beaches, because those two things, you were not going to be drinking on beaches downtown. 7 Vancouver beaches are included in the permanent basis allowance for alcohol consumption in parks. Those specifically are Kitsilano, John Hendry, Jericho, Locarno, New Brighton, Spanish Banks, and Second Beach. That notably excludes English Bay, Sunset Beach, and Third Beach. So you can, if you are downtown, drink if you're in the park, but not too far into the park.
It's an interesting set of choices. You can go to Trout Lake Beach and drink there.
Which we had to look up because that's John Hendry Beach. The others we were familiar with, and it does seem like the two other secret beaches near Kitsilano, including the Dog Beach, which is my personal favorite, are still dry. I mean, at least as dry as a beach can be, given
this
that
plan,
it is near the water.
Despite being as simple as, now you can do this thing, apparently it's not free. This is expected to incur annual operating costs of about $500,000 to the park board and another $500,000 in policing.
Well, the
park board fees have not been funded by the council beyond this current year either.
I mean, the police needed something to do, I guess. And honestly, I think as assignments go, riding the little ATV along the beaches and pouring out alcohol, you know, they're still going to have to do patrolling the beaches. They now just don't have to do the most unpleasant part of that job. Just being like, I'm here to kill the fun. It's more like, don't go crazy, which in an ideal society is what the police should be doing.
It's still
running the city.
Yeah, wild to me that this is costing $1 million and requires so many caveats and pilots and carve-outs when the rare Coquitlam win is like 3 years ago now. We just legalized drinking in all parks in the city at any time, as long as you don't leave a mess or break other existing laws. And things have been fine here.
I like that they had to clarify existing laws. Like, don't.
That's just presumed.
Yeah, okay.
That's me editorializing.
Fair. The BC Civil Liberties Association has some opinions as well, including that Vancouver's ban on daytime shelters is unconstitutional and unwise.
Yeah, I'm on the board of the BC CLA, and this is something that's been worked on by staff and community for quite a while, and they're really excited to launch this lawsuit to the BC Supreme Court challenging bylaws at the city. The BC CLA has a lot of good comments from people directly affected by these bylaws, unhoused people who have nowhere to go during the day. It's one thing to say, as the court has a number of times, that overnight sheltering bylaws, when there are no suitable alternatives, are unconstitutional because they threaten people's security of the person. But then what about during the day? You can set up your tent for a night, but then you have to move on. All of your worldly possessions have to fit on a cart or on your back, and then you're still dispossessed from the ability to be in the world.
Yes, we've gotten rid of basically every single type of space that you don't have to pay money to exist in. There's few public squares available. It's an incredibly callous thing that society has done, and it is unconscionable. I hope the end goal of this type of litigation is that we start taking our social responsibilities to every citizen seriously. I don't think this is at its heart about encouraging people to stay in parks all the time. It's about demanding that a society as rich as ours act like it and show some compassion to those among us who are less fortunate and in need of assistance. In this particular instance, in need of just a place to be.
Yeah, it goes back to what we were saying about Ken Sim's refusal to approve additional supportive housing projects in the city. If you don't want tent cities, you have to give people houses. If we're not going to give them houses, you have to let them have tents. Because you can't criminalize people and homelessness. We do all the time.
Yeah.
You shouldn't.
We shouldn't. It's not a thing we should do. But people need places to be. People need homes. And one place people have more homes than expected is Kelowna, where the city has blown past, in the words of Castanet, the first-year targets for completing housing units. They're 5-year goal is 8,774 completed housing units. The first year's target being 1,363. The city completed 1,501 new net units over the first 6 months from July 1st, 2024 to December 31st, 2024.
I did look up the real estate average price for Kelowna, and they've actually been relatively flat for a few years. There's some up and downs year over year, but since the big spike in 2016, it came down a bit and it's been flat for like 5 years. That doesn't make it an affordable city to live in. Everywhere is still quite unaffordable, but at least it's not getting worse there. And I think this supply and Kelowna's commitment to building is positive. There's more work to be done, obviously. The targets the province set, many criticized as too low because they were about 75% of what CMHC declared as housing needs for each city. But this proves it can be done. Cities like Oak Bay and West Vancouver, and even those who aren't meeting the targets, which is most of them, should do better.
In international relations news, a topic that we don't get to cover that often on this municipal politics podcast, the Treaty of Ghent has been violated.
By the Delta Police.
Yes, our competitors in the podcasting sphere have run afoul of the 200 or so year old treaty by building a 30-meter long fence along a stretch of the U.S. border in Point Roberts, in contravention and unbeknownst to the International Boundary Commission.
The motivation for this is rather sad. There's at least one story of a senior citizen wandering and getting lost across the border that is undefended and unsecured and does not have fences, famously.
And truly barely marked.
Like, there's those little stumpy things, but if you're not looking for them, you won't see them.
I mean, there is a road.
Yeah,
it's
and
the road that runs right to the south of the border.
He got lost in the forest and died, and that's tragic and sad, and we shouldn't want that. So the police's idea was, we'll put a fence, not a big fence, just a simple chain link fence. That'll stop people from stumbling over, and it'll remind people that there is a border here. Turns out there's rules against that, big treaties dating back to the War of 1812, where as part of the agreement between the US and the UK, they said, we will make sure that there are no obstructions built within 30 meters of the border, so anyone can stand there and look down it and see if anyone's crossing. You can see the markers and all of this, and a fence is an obstruction, even though it's a small chain link fence. They took it down. Delta Council is quite pissed and yelling at their staff and cops for violating international law. And now there is a international investigation into how did this happen.
I think it would behoove the Delta Police, really anyone who ends up doing something around the border, to just run it by a lawyer. Just check to see, are you allowed to do this?
I assume the cops have their own lawyers on staff.
I'm wondering if those lawyers are very angry now at the police for not checking with them. Sometimes the legal branch just doesn't get asked because people are like, yeah, this seems fine. We don't need to ask a lawyer at all. You need to ask a lawyer. You just need to check. Because then it's not your fault, it's the lawyer's fault. If you're afraid of being told no, you should ask the lawyer because you're doing something that you shouldn't be doing. If you're afraid of the consequences, you should ask the lawyer because then it's the lawyer's fault if they can give you bad advice. Anyway, don't violate the Treaty of Ghent. But you still shouldn't do it. And that's my final word on the subject. Up in Revelstoke, the city council there has voted to rescind a 1985 policy forbidding nuclear weapons. Canada's nuclear weapon-free nation status is coming to an end, as Revelstoke's bylaws were the only thing holding us back from becoming a nuclear superpower, as it is the only place in Canada where nuclear weapons were possible. None of that is true except for the thing about Revelstoke City Council voting to rescind the policy. All of that has indeed come to an end at a January 28th meeting during a debate on cleaning up their old bylaws.
Yeah, that's the official story. They did the responsible thing and consolidated decades of bylaws that were probably out of date, contradictory, The jokes about cities that ban spitting on the sidewalk or going left on a Tuesday, those nonsense things are probably in there. And here, Revelstoke's included, we ban nuclear weapons. I like to think they rescinded this prohibition as a subtle threat to America for the ongoing trade tensions. Just saying, for our part, Revelstoke might bring some nuclear weapons in. So pay attention, America.
Yes,
we will not be the
Revelstoke
quiet ski town that you think we are.
Revelstoke. Oh, dear Lord. I think we're about done here. So we end every episode of the Cabbie Report with a little tidbit from Vancouver's history, a Vancouverata, if you will. And we thought that we would delve into why there are these nuclear weapons-free signs around Vancouver. A thing that I thought was silly the first time I encountered them, and really kind of remains so.
Yeah, they date back, just like Revelstoke's bylaw, to the 1980s, when there was a large anti-war protest and movement both in Vancouver and across the country. There were tensions between Canada and the US over nuclear proliferation, with peace activists here being particularly worried that US warships with nuclear weapons might dock in Vancouver, that the US might try to establish weapons bases in Canada. Prominent activists like Libby Davies, who would go on to be Vancouver councillor and NDP MP for years, led those pushes to ban nuclear weapons, and City Council passed a nuclear weapons free zone bylaw to declare its virtues, and they put signs up, which makes it even better, because it's not just a verbally symbolic motion, but it has an expense to attack.
Metal and that kind of reflective coating that makes signs visible, so that if you're bringing a nuclear weapon in at night, you know that's a no-no.
Oh, I gotta stop at Boundary Road.
Yep.
Keep those in Burnaby.
These signs have been disappearing since the 2010 Olympics, and apparently they are no longer being replaced. The city doesn't even know where all of those signs were, but has indicated that they were generally at entrances to the city.
Guarantee some people have stolen them.
Oh, for sure. Because they're very silly. They're very silly signs. Apparently, in 1975, there were about 6,200 nuclear weapons afloat in the world on nuclear submarines or ballistic missile submarines. I don't know that it really would have stopped those submarines from docking in Vancouver, given that the port is a federal jurisdiction. But Vancouver City Council decided that they wanted to stick their necks out and say, please don't come here, to the person with the nuclear weapons. That brings us to yet another fascinating issue of the Cabbie Report. We will continue to bring you updates on this by-election as the race heats up. For Leg and Boot Media, I'm Matthew Naylor.
I'm Ian Bushfield.
Good night.